this might be a phenomena that only exists in metropolitans and major cities, tier ones. But I was surprised to see the kind of depth this market has, and the kind of density this market has in tier one cities. If you go to a tier two city in an interior state of the country, you will find that there are coaching centers across every nook and street there too. And for them, it is even more useful because that's the only gateway they have to go out and study in a, let's say, for a good college or for a good job or for whatever else they want to. And barriers to cost and access are even heightened over there, which leads to the spurt of this industry even in like it leads to the spurt even deeper in this in these geographies. So I think today 70%, 80% of our business actually comes from tier two cities and beyond. We obviously had a head start in the major cities, so like 25-30% business comes from there. But I think the phenomena of this industry spreads like in every direction.
Hi everyone, it's me again on the Stars and Startups podcast. I'm your host, Varun Vumidi. We have a deep conversation with Mukul Rutsagi of Class Plus. We explore the world of coaching institutes, understand how Class Plus has been able to carve a niche for itself, and how they've persevered to raise $9 million as part of their Series A from marquee investors including Sequoia and Bloom Ventures. Let's check in with Mukul on the show. Also, don't forget to sign up on stars.substack.com to get emails whenever we release any new episode. Don't forget, onto the show. Hey guys, welcome to the show. We have Mukul of Class Plus today with us. And hi Mukul, how you been?
Thank you. Hi Varun, how are you? Thank you.
How's lockdown treating you? It looks like you're in office.
Yes, we are in a temporary office because apparently we are in Delhi and we can't move to Noida. So that's the hustle of an early stage startup that we have taken up a mini office for 2 or 3 weeks and we're calling key people. So we're calling less than 10-15% people, but people who really need to coordinate within ourselves. So we're calling a bunch of folks in Delhi, a bunch of folks in Noida, and trying to learn how to operate like this. So lockdown has been very different. If there was one way, if there was one word I could have described it, it's probably different.
Oh man, I think different is for everyone. I think we're all coming into the new reality, so to speak. You've always been in Delhi. Are you from Delhi?
Yes, I've been born and brought up in Delhi, but I think I've hardly spent like my college was in IIT Roorkee, which was away. Then I came back for my first job. It was in Gurgaon, and then from there I've done like this is our second edtech startup. So we spent the first couple of years in our first stint that was based out of Delhi, and now Class Plus is 2.5 years old. So it's again based out of Delhi. So I think I've spent most of my life here, apart from my early childhood.
Oh, so Baswat is also your co-founder, also from Delhi. And you met him in school.
Yeah.
How do you know him?
So we accidentally met in our coaching days. Uh, and it's just irony that we're now building a business around coaching. This was not planned. It was no superhero kind of story that we wanted to script. But we met when we were preparing for our ITJ exams. Were in different schools, did not ever not met before, and I think the the great part in our journey came in when our coaching center got shut down like 1 year before our JE. So the last 12 months when we were all 17 and full of adrenaline, so we spent 12 months studying for JE just within each other. I think that brought the camaraderie very strongly together. And after that, though we went to different campuses, he went to NSIT in Delhi, I went to IIT Roorkee. So, but we still did our first. I don't know if I should call it a startup or not, but it was something that we were trying to do in colleges by ditching our semesters or internships. So we did one experience at that together. Then I went to Futures First Vision, which is a market derivative trading firm, and Bhasu went into Microsoft in their public education arm. So stayed in touch for the next 2 years, and then came back to start a first education startup.
Wait, so tell me something. You did the earlier startup while you guys were still in college, and then you went on to be an equity analyst.
So we did one small thing in college, which did not work out. So we shut it off. Then we went to our jobs. Then we came back and did one more startup full time. Did that for 2 years. Even that did not work out. Then in early 2018, we thought that let's take one more shot at what we want to do. I think we were fortunate that the market had also changed in the consumer mindset, the kind of small experiences we had gathered during our last stint. All of those came together, and then a bunch of fantastic folks who helped us kickstart the business. I think, and majority of those folks are still today around us. I
Was
think
there some learning that you taken from those startups that helped you?
absolutely. I think whatever we are, probably 90% of it goes to whatever we had been, and whatever little we have been able to accomplish. It's almost all of it is correlated to the kind of mistakes we've made in the past. And I'm pretty sure I'll be saying the same thing 5 years down the line, that whatever I'm doing wrong right now will definitely help me shape my future. And I think the innate understanding of the market. So we'd never worked in a startup. We're not a part of the workforce in any early stage startups. We've not seen founders close up. We've not seen processes being built close up. So Bhasar used to come from Microsoft, which is a big company, to say the least. I also came from a company which was like almost 1,000 people odd, so it was a very structured firm. So there was nothing early about early stage startup kind of a thing in our CVs or our experiences. So I think it was very important for us that all the things that we could learn it on our own.
So
And
Is Class Plus part of it's part of the edtech space. I mean,
yeah,
if you want to call it so, but edtech is obviously a lot more than just technology, right? I think it gets grouped into this whole
Ed,
yeah. There's just
Ed,
like there's so many types of edtech startups. You have a Byju's, which is doing coaching itself, creating content. You have Art Academy. You have Simply Learn. There's so many types of startup that are working in ed space. Um, how do you look at this? Is this a subcategory of creating technology for spaces? Actually, what is Class Plus?
yeah. So ClassPlus was built with an objective of empowering these neighborhood coaching centers that you would find in every nook and streets of the country. And these are typically small businesses which are run by uh, educators who double up as content creators, marketers, and taking care of the entire setup on their own. So these teachers are extremely popular in their localities, and they run a small boutique coaching shop with, let's say, 100 students on an average. So I think all these, like, and this market is super fragmented. So like all the parallel markets which are super fragmented, run by retail stores, this market was also devoid of technology, and any small business cannot afford the kind of, whether it's cost, effort, or knowledge, to build their own tech stack, which enables them to do things which are very ancillary to their business. For example, in our case, a coaching center or a teacher needed to communicate, distribute content, have a touch with parents, manage their payment records. So I think all these things were something which were being done by them manually, and consumed a lot of their time and bandwidth. And essentially, they could not ever make an online footprint of their businesses because they can't invest in that kind of a technology. And that is why I think we came in. So the single mission of ClassPlus is to empower coaching centers and teachers who have been predominantly offline in nature, build take their coaching centers or take their local businesses online. Uh, and we essentially facilitate all kind of ancillary things that they do, apart from teaching on the blackboard, to be done on a single mobile platform. So now, whether it's their communication, scheduling, payments, content distribution, everything comes onto a single mobile platform, which is accessed by their students and parents as well. So bringing the entire ecosystem of a tutor onto one single platform is essentially what ClassPlus does.
So
So I
would you
think
say
like, if I actually had to take, there is less of ed in our business.
yeah?
There's more of tech in our business. So this is like we're a product which can be expanded beyond ed also, like if you want to. But I think that's still very far off the line. A primary intention has been to help teachers scale their businesses, and I think that's all that we do.
Who would be your competitors?
If there's no competitor as such, one, we're not a B2C company, so all the big startups that are contributing so heavily to the Indian
Right.
tech. never a competitor of that, because essentially we're a B2B company. We serve our customers, and these customers are the ones who are in the thick of action rather than we being there. So that's one stark differentiation that we have from anybody else. Secondly, I think more than a competitor, I think there are so our product actually does a lot of things for these teachers, and like for example, a lot of communication between the students and teachers is done on the platform. Now, a competing product could have been a Telegram for that, for example. Similarly, we a lot of content is being shared by teachers on with their students. Now, you could say that somebody like a Dropbox could be a competition. So it's not exactly about a horizontal competition as per se. The market landscape for these coaching centers is very, very different, and the way they see technology is very different from the way a large business, or let's say a, a new consumer would see them. So I don't see direct competing as such. And plus, especially in edtech, the differentiation between every startup or the every product offering is so stark that I essentially find it hard to pitch any edtech company as a competition to anybody else, because there's so much. There's content, there's delivery, there's pricing, there is mode of communication. There are so many aspects to the entire thing, and then there's market difference, whether it's K-12, whether it's skill training, whether it's vocational, whether it's test prep. So I think it's hard to say that edtech in itself. I don't think any edtech company really competes with anybody else, and until and unless the offerings are absolutely congruent. Like calling similar offerings as competition, I don't think that works out in edtech in India.
What has been the tech adoption in kind of you're based out of Delhi, Noida, right? And you're having a lot of these tools being built for, say, coaching centers that probably in metro tier ones. Is there adoption in other cities as well? What is your kind of user base, and how do these coaching centers that are not in the core areas?
And this is something that I also dabbled with very deeply when we started up. And I thought that this might be a phenomena that only exists in metropolitans and major cities, tier ones. But I was surprised to see the kind of depth this market has, and the kind of density this market has in tier one cities. If you go to a tier two city in an interior state of the country, you will find that there are coaching centers across every nook and street there too. And for them, it is even more useful because that's the only gateway they have to go out and study in a, let's say, for a good college or for a good job or for whatever else they want to. And barriers to cost and access are even heightened over there, which leads to the spurt of this industry. Even in like it leads to the spurt even deeper in this in these geographies. So I think today 70%, 80% of our business actually comes from tier two cities and beyond. We obviously had a head start in the major cities, so like 25-30% business comes from there. But I think the phenomena of this industry spreads like in every direction.
These students pay for some of these classes. They spend a lot of money, right?
So the spend of an Indian family in education is probably the third highest after, let's say, real estate and food. And historically, you would never have seen a parent compromising on this child's academics because of some other expense, as long as possible for them. So I think it's very deep rooted in our culture that education is a priority. People don't think about spending in these markets, and essentially, this is the only way. This is the only way an Indian child can actually upskill himself, or let's say find out a better opportunity in the real world. And so this is the gateway for them to uplift themselves societally, financially, and morally. So that's why you would see that there would be like thousands of stories across generations where people would have uh, put their long assets into, let's say, mortgage, but ensure their child's education being always on the top. And especially with success ratios being so less, whether you look at test prep, whether you look at government jobs, whether you look at anything that you want to do in life, we are a competitive society. So everyone is trying to get any unfair advantage that they can, and that leads to high costs.
So that leads me to my next question, right? Because if you look at the students paying and parents paying for their kids to get this kind of coaching, uh, the the level of, rather the ability of each student is not the same, right? And as I understand it, a lot of these coaching centers have hundreds of students, thousands of students. Um, how does the uh, how do they structure these classes? Is it like one student to the same 100, rather one teacher to the same 100? Is it split? Because I mean, I think they want to do justice to the kind of money that the you know uh, parents are paying as well.
I think typically, if you look at these classes, these are every class would have, let's say, 15 to 25 students on an average, and these classes are obviously bucketed by the respective classes of these students. Plus, some large coaching institutes in the country, they obviously create these star batches and then average batches, and they want to divide students on the basis of how they perform, and what kind of curriculum floats in every class. Because let's say the needs of every student might be different. So for people who want to attempt advanced problems, these students are grouped together and in probably one higher batch, and that is where the advanced curriculum would go. In general, in the local coaching centers, I think this is not the place. I think that is where the trust and care of the local tutor also comes into play, because essentially their job is not to differentiate between students and let's say treat them with separate curriculum. Their role and their importance is to ensure that everybody goes beyond the minimum threshold that they should. So for them, it's more important that everybody scores X percentage rather than two students scoring 2x and others not doing it well. So I think that is the local touch and the local care that comes with these offline coaching institutes, which are around every locality. Which and these this can't be replicated with, let's say, any big brand, or let's say in a big platform where, let's say, content might be available. So,
It reminds me of the Netflix show Kota Factory, right? Where
yeah.
is that true? Like, is that exactly how it works in a lot of these places?
Unfortunately, and I know I should kill myself for this, but I have not watched Code of Factory till now.
No, no, I'm sure you're busy with other things, but
But but no, I can get the sense of it. Uh, we've always been a part of that system. So like even though I like watched a few few trailers or something, I could understand what they were trying. And I think whatever they've shown is pretty realistic, I would say, to the least, because kids are under those kinds of, how do I say, societal pressure, or let's say peer performance expectations. And it's a truth that people go and spend out 2 years at the young adolescent ages and stay away from their families and learn. I think that's just how the industry has operated so far. And who knows, we might see a disruption of this anytime. But typically, that has been, and it's not very. So it might look very unfamiliar to somebody outside India, but India as a country, even in the deep-rooted origins that we had, there was this term called Gurukul, where kids used to go from at the age of 5 or 6, spend 14 years with their gurus in their ashrams, and then come back as mature and learned individuals. And like whether it be the son of a king or whether it be anybody else, they would all be subjected to the same kind of stress and training in their 14 years in Gurukul. And Kota was what? It was just a mini version of a Gurukul for 2 years. So I think all these things that happen in Indian education stem down from the cultural roots, all the things that we've learned over our deep-rooted culture. So I was not surprised, like such a phenomena not happening in any other country but only happening in India. It is there because it is deep-rooted in our systems. In India, like the Guru Shishya culture is there, and Shishyas will do anything. This is the country where Eklavya cut his thumb. And I know this might sound fancy or like too too flamboyant to say, but this is how education is treated in India. people love their teachers and they can do anything to learn from them.
Is it restricted to certain areas like Kota, or it is across the country? There are
It's
other.
all there in the country. I'll tell you one example. It does not matter whether the best teacher has an AC in their classrooms or not. The crowds will go, the class will go full because the teacher is teaching over there.
So is this? So I think you refer to them as superstars, right? Har gali mein, like I've heard you say this once before.
No, like yeah, they are superstars. I think they're anyway where the kind of effort teachers put in this country is very superhuman. Think of it, they are educators, they are content marketers, they manage their payrolls, they run their entity also profitably, and then on top of that they also improve themselves, and there's a lot of role around student mentoring that they do, which is not direct academics. So I think having the ability to pull off so many roles in within one person, I think for me, like, teachers have always been superstars in this country. They'll always be, and they're prevalent across.
What's
They
this?
look like anybody else.
What's this mentoring thing? I've never heard this before.
So a lot of interaction of a student with his teacher is not just about academics. A lot of test prep, especially in India, is about how do you take examinations, and to mentally condition somebody to be spending 2 years long, or let's say 4 year long missions, and then being super healthier in the entire time and knowing what to do, what not to do. Imagine this where a class 10th boards guy is what, 16 years old student. There's an enormous pressure on him. He needs conditioning. The greatest batsman of our lifetime needed conditioning. Everybody needs conditioning. So I think that conditioning is done by these coaches in sports, which is also a role taken by tutors in real lives. And like the coach of the Indian national cricket team might not be contributing to batting as much as he would be contributing to, let's say, conditioning and other things, and being a support for our batsmen. And I think that is what is needed by these teachers themselves. That's a big aspect of the role that we never talk about.
So you're saying that a lot of time that they do spend is also mentally conditioning some of these students. Absolutely. And giving them the coaching. What would that look like? Is it mostly like, okay, about the program, or is it about family? Is it about pressure? What is it typically?
It's a mix of all of them actually. It varies very case to case, but yes, it is about it's about families, it's about performances, it's about what you want to do ahead, it's about pulling up their spirits, it's about identifying chinks which might not be visible normally. Imagine here a tutor essentially knows everything about their 100 students. Like, we might think that he's seeing them, but talk to him about any student and he would pick out a few things which might not be visible to the naked eye of yours and mine. And to put those learnings into perspective with the students and have a chat with them on how do they think they can improve. Like a simple example, a teacher might need to spend a lot of time with somebody on a problem that he can't highlight in public. And there's a movie made on this. I'll tell you. I don't know. Have you watched Tare Zameen Par?
Yeah.
So Amir Khan was less of a teacher but more of a conditioner in that movie. That is also a role that teachers play in this country.
I mean, which is very surprising in terms of somebody going to that extent, and because it's also about taking a real interest in that student, right?
This is the reason why I say technology cannot replace teachers. That is something that I say day in day out to everybody I meet. And this is the reason you cannot replicate the experience of learning purely with technology. You can probably replace the content, you can replace the delivery, you can replace the structure, schedules. But can you replace this? I don't think so. That's one of the reasons why we believe in teachers and not. That's why we believe in technology being a supplement to teachers rather than being something which tries to eliminate teachers. So our approach towards technology is more of enablement rather than elimination.
So what you're doing is augmenting teachers, right? To be
Absolutely.
able to
We're making teachers more powerful.
Right. So when you went about this, which is obviously not the traditional route, which is saying, okay, can I create content? Can I do everything online? Like you're saying, replace a teacher. You're saying I'm going to go augment it. That means you have to co-create the product along with the teacher, right? Um, what was the process? Did you pick 5 teachers or tutors and say, hey, we'll give you a free software, let us help you build this? Did you take some approach to that, or did you just pick out stuff from that you already built from your earlier startup, said, okay, here it is, why would you like to use this, and then start selling?
So at that time, there were no set processes as per se, but essentially we as founders were doing all the sales. And then like not all the sales, but a majority of sales. So I think having their presence on ground really helped us gauge some realities. Um, there was obviously only a few bunch of teachers that we were working with, so like feedback was more granular, more direct, and it had more perspective. And it was never a place where we would build something and go and then seek an approval, but we would rather seek their feedbacks and inputs while we were making it. And that could be inputs while over a conversation, while we were in a sales pitch, or we might have looked at teachers doing different things. There was no process as per se. It was a very touch and feel thing that we did to initially get this off the ground. And then essentially once the teachers are using the platform, they would tell you every day that this is missing, that is missing, this is not right, that's not right. And then it's up to you to take that feedback and work on. So I think even today, if you ask me, I don't have a product roadmap more than 90 days. And I would say that, yeah, we will come to know. The market risk will tell us what to go about rather than we trying to predict, because this is anyway an industry which is undergoing transformation right now. So this is moving into a radical delta rather than incremental delta. Now, nobody has seen that radical delta, but the people who are the closest to the ground, which are the teachers and students themselves, they probably have a sneak peek around this radical delta. And this is the customer call that I was referring to when we just spoke. I think that is very important. How do we structure this now at this scale? How do we structure this? It's hard. So because of the complexities of the business product scale, it's not as easy to do it anymore. But still trying to keep as much as we can.
You're technically selling enterprise software, right? Like these are small
SMB
enterprises.
Software,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, small SMB software.
these are SMEs.
So that is what we are. We're more of an SMB tech company rather than a net tech company, to be very honest.
I mean, I know the first conversations probably happen in person, and maybe now when you're isolated, you're probably not doing in-person meetings as well. But how does the process work? Is it mostly like over the phone? Are you able to convince coaches to buy into what you're selling over a call?
Since the product, the company, the brand, the needs, and these have matured, and like over the last 2 months, like there was not an option of going out. So there was, as much as there was not an option for us to go out even if we wanted to, it was also not an option to buy for a consumer to buy and after meeting us, because for them also it was not an option. So when the forces of nature make both the parties adjust to something, then they make it happen. So in that case, you can also try it on, let's say, phone or anything that is different. But I think it's also about the maturity of the product as per se. So had we been trying this over, and it's also about the maturity of the market and the kind of times that we are in. If you ask me to replicate this thing in 2014, I cannot do it for sure. So I think timing is probably the greatest thing, the greatest catalyst, especially if not the greatest factor in trying to do anything.
Absolutely. So this is a very fragmented market, and primarily where or like you're saying, there are not many competitors. So being fragmented is another piece. So you're helping the tutors collect payments. You're helping them with assessments,
Yeah.
with communication with students and parents, probably, right?
Yeah.
And are there more pieces to it? Like, is it modular?
There's a lot of depth to the platform, but yeah, if you talk about the broad heads, I think communication is one, payment selection is one, content delivery, which is around, let's say, assessments, notes, or videos, whatever it is. So predominantly these three heads, right?
What is the major value add that a tutor gets? Is it that a lot of his
This
content?
is very interesting. This is very different for every sort of coaching center itself, and this varies. And I'll tell you the complexities. This varies between segments, whether it's K-12, test prep, IAS, national government exams, state government exams, skill training, language learning. So there's one parameter amongst these that will come in, which is the 1 degree complexity. Now the second degree complexity would be the size of the institute, like how big is it? Whether it's like standalone, whether it's a non-branded chain with let's say 2-3 centers, or it's a branded chain with let's say 3-4 centers. Then whether these centers are in different cities, same cities. That's the second level variable. Yeah, the third is also about the ambition of that tutor, what he wants, and that ambition is very very subjective to the kind of teachers that might be a part of that coaching institute now, or they might be a different set the next year, or they might have been a different set the past year. So I think the ambition of whether they want to take it online, or whether they want to use it for admin purposes, or whether they want to use it just as a communication module, or whether they want it to like streamline their internal ops. Now that is the third ambition of it. So it's a 3 degree graph, and you can probably think of one more, but I'm not able to right now. But it's a 3 degree graph where anybody can put a finger, and that is how they'll use the platform. That is how they'll see the platform. That there's an innate different light where everybody sees it. So it's hard for me to actually point out that what's the most valuable. The question is, what's the most valuable for whom? Are we asking?
Where have we seen the most utilization? Like I would imagine, the utilization. Of course, attendance is probably the most used module in the whole system.
Yeah, so I think that also depends. For example, a tutor who might be teaching class 8, 9, 10th, 11th, 12th kids, they might use attendance. But for somebody who's teaching government exams, that's the least useful feature for them. So I think two things which are like really common is I think communication is something that everybody does. So I think that's important, like messaging and everything. Content distribution is again, like if I put it as vertical head. Now some kind of coaching center, some brackets would want to use text more than anything. Some people would want to use assessments more than others. Some people would think that videos is a better way of content distribution. So but yeah, content distribution communication is something that people would want to, like, because these are the essential core of what happens in a classroom. Like even when you take up a physical classroom, you speak, you interact, and you disseminate content, and everything else comes around it, like performance, payments, scheduling, and let's say monetization, whatever it is that comes around this entire piece. Yeah.
How long does it take for a coaching center to go online? Is it like, depend on how they've maintained their materials, etc.?
It is totally a function of that. But anyway, it does not take more than 7 to 14 days for them to be like completely on it.
So do you have a team
Not
that
a
helps
very
them?
Yeah. So the product has been built it that way that it does not make it very complex would be for them. And we've also obviously gone through a lot of processes which we have realized that how can we make it easier for them, onboarding processes. Then we help them as much as we could. It's still a DIY model. We don't do anything directly for them. We encourage them to use it and understand it rather than, let's say, do it. We handhold them, but we don't. We, we want them to learn the platform, so we do it in a more DIY model.
Fantastic. You've been part of the Surge Accelerator. I think you
Yeah.
just graduated from that program.
Yeah.
How helpful was it? Can you give our audience kind of like your experience going through the program?
I think it was superbly helpful. I think it was not just Surge. We actually raised our pre-series A from Sequoia Search and Bloom
Nice.
Ventures. It was a part of the same round, and a couple of very helpful angels also came on board. So I think it was superbly helpful. As I've repeatedly said in like almost all of my conversations, like for me, partners matter more than capital. Always and always. We are some people who might not. We'll discuss more about what we want to do with the business and how like things structure and inside the let's say partner, like the funds ecosystem, rather than spending times with them debating and bargaining over a couple of basis points on dilution, or let's say a 2-3%, 5% here and there on valuation. We'll never do that, because ultimately this is a 10-year long journey that we are going to take together, and like 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 bargaining over valuations and like spending time on that is like trying to understand things which are lesser important for that 10-year long journey. So I think in with that light, I think both Bloom and Surge have been like super exceptional for us. They've offered us a lot of help in understanding how the business is done, how we have to split our teams, on how um, our go to market should go, on how what kind of products we should think about, what kind of processes we should put about. We were fortunate enough to have a chance to speak with some of the best founders of this country and get in touch with them, learn from them, to understand them what kind of good things they did, what kind of mistakes they asked us to avoid. I think being a part of that family is super important. It's as much worth as the capital is, and I think that's the hallmark of great partners. That if they come behind you, they try to ensure everything that they can do to help you succeed. And I felt a lot of vibes towards like both Surge and Bloom towards that. In fact, now we have closed us. Now we've even closed a round after our Surge round, and we just from Surge and Bloom we raised 2.5 million, I think, sometime last year, and now we've just closed another our Series A of 9 million USD,
Congratulations.
which is again like Surge and Sequoia Surge and Bloom were a part of that. Plus,
Right.
we also were fortunate to get a great partner in RTP Global, which is a global investment firm, and they've invested in a lot of parallel businesses across geographies. So I think building a great cap table is very, very important for me if I want to run this business over the next 10 years and make this a legendary company. It's impossible to. It's not. It's foolish to think that I would be able to do it only by myself.
So help me understand. I mean, you obviously have a lot of these partners. You've raised a little bit of capital. Even prior to Surge, you had a little bit of cash in the bank.
Yep.
But you're creating a SaaS play in a way where your
Yeah.
business is mostly technology, and a lot of these centers also pay you between 15 to 50K
Yeah,
rupees.
they pay us decently to cover our operational costs. Yeah.
Right. So your net, you're positive. I'm guessing a lot of these sales.
No, we're not completely profitable. Yes, we break even on our operations, but yes, we invest a lot in our fixed costs in technology and product, and those are the costs that we make burn money on.
Okay, so I'm guessing then the money you raised probably goes towards just product development and
It's a lot of it is also about the things that we might do in future. Like we've been a very cash efficient company as so far, and we've been super frugal. We have spent less than 20% of the capital that we've raised so far in totality. So a lot of it still is a lot of it is still in our banks, and we're just prepared for the time when a new opportunity comes. We won't have to look behind and go back and spend time in, let's say, arranging for the resources and like um, debating whether we can do it or not. We want to be prepared for that time, and that's why raising capital early also was a part of the same journey. It was not that because we were finishing out of capital or we were like losing out on capital or we were running out of capital that we were anyway not uh, doing a lot of burn on the business. But I think it was more about two things. One, having that entire resource pool available for whenever we think that it's the right time to use it and go aggressive. Secondly, it was also about getting a chance to partner with great people, and uh, and that is where dilution does not matter. Like it does not really matter at all. So if we could see a chance to partner with a great fund, we would do it early, even if we don't need the capital as much as right now, because the ecosystem is as valuable as that. So that is why we've raised like I think what we've raised 3 rounds of capital in the past 15 months.
so are you hiring? Looks like there's a lot of traction. Uh, you know,
Always, like I think. So as a founder, I think we're always hiring and we're always fundraising. So these are the only two things which always, and we are always like building for the customer. That's an unsaid thing.
so if someone's listening to the program right now and wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach you?
Mukul at classplus.co is the best way to reach. I still try to. I'm super active on my WhatsApp and my LinkedIn. Try to respond to as many messages as you can. Try to be super responsive on my emails too. Personally, I take hiring a lot seriously at Class Plus because it's not just about skill sets; it's a lot about culture. And the most talented batsman would not have been. I'm pretty sure, like I know this for a fact, that the most talented batsman that was ever born did not end up making as the greatest batsman in the history of the cricket, history of the game. So I
Who is
think
that?
culture is, yeah. I know that the best batsman for in the game was Sachin. I won't take a name on who was the most talented batsman, but it
you
was
you
definitely.
you seem to have a lot of sports metaphors. Do you follow a lot of sport? You play any sport?
I do play sports. So, for example, I'm a great fan of table tennis. I predominantly, apart from squash, I think I've played most of the sports that were accessible to me. But I think sports is a great way to build teams. I think I'll tell you why I love sports. In fact, there's one thing I also got bashed for one time. When we were hiring for class president in the early days, I actually one of the interviews was actually about giving a mobile game to somebody and just observing how they play it. Even today, we still give out some random riddles to people in the interview process, and the only reason of doing that is to see how they play games. Like sports tell you a lot of character, how much your persistence, your perseverance, your ability to defy the temptation of looking out for cheat codes, for example. uh, the ability to be always up, the ability to coordinate with people and work. I think if I had a chance, I would have played a game with everybody who was recruiting. If there was a common game, I think sports are a great way to judge people's character and how long they.
Do you play TT? Is that what's in the
Well,
office?
yeah, we have a we have a TD table now. Fortunately, we have a decent office, so we have space for a TD table. Earlier, we did not have. But just like for anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you ever think what perseverance is about, go and read the story of Marwan Atapattu. That's the single greatest story out
This
there
is
in the
the
world.
Sri Lankan cricketer Marwan Atapattu.
It took him 6 7 years across 3 test matches before he made his second international run. Out of his first 5 innings, I think he was dismissed on 0 on 4 of them and got dropped twice, came back, again got dropped, came back, again got dropped. The third time he came in, he scored I think more than 5,000 runs for his country. He was obviously the captain, and he scored 6 double centuries among 16 Test centuries. And 6 double centuries is something to perspective. I think Sachin scored the same, so it's not something that's very common. I think that is the single greatest story of perseverance I've read in cricket. I'm pretty sure there would be other sports also, but I think yeah, I think everyone should have some part of their life in sports.
What's the most amount of time you spent on something during lockdown?
Thinking actually.
Do you meditate? Do you spend time with
Well,
yourself?
I started playing PUBG during this time. I was never a fan of action games. I played Counter Strike in my college days, but it was mostly around like other games. But for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been trying to understand uh, the entire thing. Also, I started playing PUBG during the lockdown, and I think that was one new thing that I did. But I anyway used to spend like almost 1 or 2 hours daily on mobile gaming. So I think
Oh wow,
few new.
that's pretty serious stuff.
No, I think that's my break. That's my only break. So I haven't watched a movie. I don't know since when. I think the total number of movies that I've watched in my lifetime are less than 20. I've not watched a TV series ever because I don't find it interesting. But I find gaming interesting. So I do what I do. I do what I like.
Are there any Indian CEOs that you look up to?
Yes, yeah, a lot of them actually. And I think it's not just about Indian. Since I've asked Indian, I would. So I think I like Kunal a lot. And I
Kunal
was
Shah?
fortunate to have him.
Okay.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have him on my cap table. The sheer understanding of human psychology that he has, and also the ability to break a complex problem statement into a very simple problem statement. I'm still trying to learn from him. Um, have spent some amount of time with him, so that's one. That's one ability that I really like. I think I really like. I've never had a chance to interact with Bhavish Agarwal, but I think the kind of persona he's maintained about Ola, I've heard him speak a couple of times. I think that's been like, super inspiring. I like Kunal Bahal for the sheer perseverance he is and the grit that. So I was fortunate to have a chance to hear him speak at a search session around 6 months back,
Oh, nice.
and was taken aback by the kind of honesty and the grit that he put in his business, especially over the last few years. So I think these are some of the traits that I've tried picking up from people, and I think that happens every time we meet somebody else. I think
How did you meet Kunal and get the first check?
I think we met him during search, and he was very kind on us. He did not. He did not. I think he understood our business very well. He understands teachers. He understands education. So we just had a chat, and then he said that and we asked him very straight that we want to partner with you. We want to learn from you. In what capacity, we'll discover it.
Awesome, Mukul. Thanks so much for your time. This has been awesome.
Have a nice day, Varun. Thank you.